This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Bruschi.
We're going to talk a little bit about Bryan Kohberger and where things are standing right there with attorney Michael McAuliffe. He is someone who has some experience in the world of prosecuting people like this. He was the former state attorney for Palm Beach County. Now back in private practice. Michael, I want to ask you, there seems to be a lot of evidence that has come out over the last several months about Kohberger. Some of it seems quite damning. And there's moments where it seems that some holes could be poked through. But the stack of this looks pretty damning to maybe you got a chance here is still quite a bit higher. What's your thoughts?
Time will tell. You know, this is a horrible quadruple homicide in the early morning hours. It's a fascinating case because of the status of the case itself. It's a potential death penalty case. The preliminary hearing was put off for many months. There's a gag order in the case, so that leaves us some room to ponder the state of the evidence. There's been some tantalizing clues about the amount of the evidence and the effectiveness of the case. It's a circumstantial case, but prosecutors don't shy away from a circumstantial case when it comes to capital litigation. So, I, as a former elected state attorney and someone who brought death penalty cases, I do think it's interesting that the preliminary hearing was put off by a waiver of the defense by the defendant and his counsel. One could infer that both sides are trying to figure out how to best evaluate a case that's a potential death penalty case. And, we could get some surprises procedurally before late June. But they would be a surprise at this point, wouldn't it?
It would be. Are you referring to the possibility of a grand jury being convened and this moving a little bit faster and a little bit more of a direct direction?
Yeah. So it's surprising that the preliminary hearing was the right to a speedy preliminary hearing was waived. It is a little surprising there hasn't been a grand jury indictment returned thus far. There's a gag order in the case. There's a conflict of interest issue that was dogging the public defender. Yep. There was some information about an internal investigation of at least one of the investigators on the case. So there's a lot going on, and behind the curtain, it's tough to tell how significant it'll be as it plays out. As a former death penalty prosecutor, I just think it is interesting that there is a significant delay in the procedural aspects of the case, including an indictment and a decision to file or not file the notice of intent to seek the death penalty.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think there has not been a grand jury that's been convened to indict him and no notice of intent for the death penalty?
It's also a bit of a mystery. I think that both sides, prosecution and defense, for their own reasons, are looking to buy or have some additional time to investigate and evaluate the case is the only insight I could offer you. I think that in a different circumstance, a quadruple homicide with this amount of at least known evidence, I would have thought that it would have normally proceeded along the trial track, and we would have seen an indictment and then a decision that's acted upon as to whether to file the notice to seek or not.
What would the reason be for the grand jury not even have a grand jury convened for this? Is it something to do with the evidence? Is there not enough evidence where that would not be a good choice? Who makes the choice to convene a grand jury in this sort of a situation?
Well, it's the prosecutor's discretion, usually within a certain time period. Yeah. But those deadlines have all been extended by agreement before the court. And so the normal timeframes that act as requirements to keep some momentum going, particularly in a capital case, aren't happening here. And I don't think it's the state of the evidence, because the quantum of evidence, the amount of evidence, is just probable cause to get the return of indictment that would replace a preliminary hearing, which is also not guilt or innocence. It's just, do you have enough as a threshold matter to go to trial? And I think there's little, if no question, that certainly probable cause exists in this case. So there may be a lot happening behind the scenes that we don't know, including discussions between the prosecutor and defense counsel about an off ramp for the case. But I just say that because it's an obvious possibility, but I don't really have any particular facts to support that view.
I'm curious to get your insight on this, because I talked to all sorts of people, from defense attorneys to investigators to you name it. And I've heard varying opinions about the arrest affidavit and what was published on it. There was quite a bit of evidence, enough, certainly to arrest Kohberger, and the subsequent documents also detailing quite a bit of what was taken out of the home and such that will be in evidence for discovery. Is there likely a lot more evidence that we are not seeing right now? I know all the public knows about in terms of DNA at this moment is the knife sheath. Beyond that, we don't know if there's more DNA in the public. Would they have likely at that moment of issuing those documents have put the full laundry list of everything that they have on those documents, or are they holding a lot of those things back for court when this actually comes to fruition? And then we'll see just how much they have against him.
I think it's very possible that the prosecution is not disclosing all the evidence that it has in its possession relating to these crimes. Remember, it's just a preliminary, a probable cause affidavit, whether it's a search warrant or an arrest warrant, has enough to get you to present to a court to get approval or permission to do something, either search a premises for potential evidence or arrest a person to start the criminal justice process. But there's no requirement that somebody laundry list everything that they have or that they know. And remember, the investigation has continued in significant ways since the searches and then the arrest. So there's more there, but the gag order does limit what the folks who are involved in the case can relate and comment on. So it's up to amateur sleuths to try to infer and figure it out.
With what we know thus far, as far as evidence that's been out there, things that amateur sleuths have found, and the such, do you think that there is something here that we are missing? Is there a possibility that Bryan Kohberger was not involved in any of this, and there just happens to be a slew of very, very bizarre coincidences that put him in a lot of proximity to these people and this case?
Well, if you are asking whether it's possible that the forensic evidence, the cell tower triangulation, the DNA, the information that links his car, all that together, including the surviving roommate who identified an individual who it's easy to conclude reasonably was the murderer, matches the general profile and description of the defendant in this case. My personal individual opinion is that this case, while circumstantial, is meritorious and entirely winnable from the state's perspective. Not that there aren't areas that a defense attorney can and should poke, prod, and defend a client who's facing a quadruple homicide and possibly a death penalty request. So it's a case that can be and might be tried in open court. But if I were coming down on one side or another, I'd be more comfortable presenting this case as a prosecutor than as a defense attorney.
What would you be telling your client right now if you were the defense attorney for Kohberger, knowing what we know thus far as fact, and assuming that there's obviously a bit more that's known between the two parties in discovery right now?
Well, you, as a defense attorney in a capital case, your first and highest priority is to deal with the death penalty. Now, it's not a death penalty case yet. It's just a possible death penalty, whether one or more aggravators exist. It's not hard to identify and conclude that an aggravator exists in this case, and it would otherwise be a candidate to seek the death penalty if you're looking at it from the state's perspective. So the defense attorney's first priority is to save his or her client's life. And then comes the issue really of whether the case is provable absent the death penalty being part of the discussion. So I would probably be trying to explain the process and some of the factors to the client and trying to prepare a vigorous defense in order to create potential leverage for a discussion.
Would best case scenario for Kohberger at this point, I mean, just as all speculation, honestly be some sort of settlement where they'll take death penalty off the table if he were to plead guilty?
Well, in any potential death penalty case, that's obviously one of the largest areas of discussion is about removing it. And, many death penalty cases are resolved through a guilty plea with life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. Here, it's just too early to tell or to get any insight as to the arc of this case because of some of these procedural delays. I mean, we'll see it in the next couple months. We'll see whether the indictment is returned. We'll see if there's a notice of intent to seek filed, and that would obviously moot the issue of a preliminary hearing. So if those things happen, then that tells us something that it's likely on a trial track. But the time delay could very well be in order for the investigation to round out and then a fair evaluation by both sides of the strengths and weaknesses of the state's case. And then there would, I hope, be some at least discussion about the issue of the death penalty.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers podcast
With Tony Bruschi.
Michael McAuliffe, he is an attorney, former state attorney for Palm Beach County. Thank you so much for your insights into that case. Greatly appreciate it. If you like the show, press subscribe wherever you download podcasts. So you don't miss any breaking updates or discussions on the cases. We have it for you right here. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.